Hi, my name is Stuart Lynch, and this is the fifth and final video of the series where I'm showing you how you can add a UI image picker to your SwiftUI app so that you can both select a photo from your Photos album or take a photo from your device's camera. In this final video, we'll be continuing with updating our UI by creating functions in our view model so that we can load our stored images from the Documents folder. We'll test, refactor, and test again to ensure that our app is App Store ready. Now before I get started, I just want to ask that if you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Make sure you ring the bell to be notified of future videos. Comments and likes are always appreciated. And if you care to support my work, you can buy me a coffee. If this is something you want to learn, then keep watching. If you're following along with this video, you can continue to use the code from the last video. However, if you're just starting here, I have provided the completed project from the previous video, and you can download it from the link provided in the description below. We've come to the final video in this 5-part series. And in this video, we'll load in and display all of our saved images in a horizontal scroll view, and when we select one, the image will be displayed. We will then code the edit action for the name along with a delete function because our delete button will now be displayed with an image selected. In addition to adding a few more user-friendly features, we'll check our error handling and finally clean up our code a bit by separating out the components into an extension. Now you may think that we don't have much to do and that this video will be short, but the fact of the matter is that the last 10% of an app takes 90% of your time. You need to make sure that you test because, as you'll see, we may introduce bugs as we add new features or enhancements and refactor our code. What we want to do is to load all of our images when our app loads and our content view is presented. So the first thing we'll have to do in our view model is create a function for that. What we'll need to do is to load our JSON file and populate our MyImages array. So first, I'll try to use our file manager's readDocument function to retrieve that data. And this means that we'll need to use a do-catch block for that. Within the do block, we can let data be equal to try file manager readDocument. If that throws an error, then our catch block can be set so that we can set another show file alert to true. We can set the app errors to the MyImageError type, casting that error as a MyImageError. And this will trigger an alert when the function is called. If it's successful, however, it reads the data and we can create a decoder and then do another do-catch block to try to decode it into an array of MyImages and assign that to our property, the MyImages. If this fails, we'll again set the show file alert to true and set the app error to the error type of a decoding error. In Content View, then, we can add a task method to the vStack that will use the file manager's doc exists to check first to see if the actual file exists. And if it does, we can call that new function we just created in our view model. So now when our Content View loads, we'll have all of our images loaded into the array of MyImage. And now we need to display them. But first we'll have to retrieve the image from our document directory. So I'll open the MyImage struct and I'm going to create a new computed property called image that is a UI image. We can then do a do-catch block to try to read the image with the specified ID using our file manager's readImage function. If it can find it, we can return it. Of course, this will require importing UIKit because it's a UI image. Now, if this function throws an error, we can return a generic UI image instead. So we're not going to report an error, we're just going to return a placeholder image. And we'll use a system image of photo.fill. And we'll need to unwrap that, so you'll have to make sure that you spell it correctly. Back in Content View now then, I'll create a horizontal scrolling image right before our image in that VStack. We'll start by creating a scroll view in the horizontal direction, and then set the showing of the indicators to false. Within the scroll view, we can create an H-stack, and we'll set a spacing of 10. Then, in the H-stack, I'll create a for each loop that will iterate over each of our view models' MyImages array. Within the for each loop, we can create a VStack. Then we'll create an image from the myimage.image, which is a UI image. We'll set it to resizable, scale to fill, and a frame with a width and height of 100. We'll create a clip shape of a rounded rectangle with a corner radius of 15. And then we'll add a black shadow with an opacity of 0.6 and a radius of 2, expanding 2 in both the X and Y directions. This is then followed by a text view containing the image name. And then finally on the scroll view, we'll add some horizontal padding. Let's test this now in the simulator. When we run, we see that our 3 images are presented in that horizontal scroll view. Let's add a new one. How about this one? Let's call it Big Waterfall. See how it immediately gets added to our scroll view? That's perfect. Let's take a look then at the JSON in our Documents folder. Let's open it in Xcode and invalidate it by changing one of the keys temporarily, because we're going to want to check to see that our error handling is working. If we run the app now, it appears that we're getting nothing. Well, that's because our function is throwing an error and setting up the alert, but we have yet to implement that alert. So back in Content View then, we'll need to add an alert that is associated with our app error. Currently, we have one that's associated with the camera error. So what we'd like to do now is to move that camera error up and have it associated more with our camera button, as that makes more sense. So let's just copy and paste it there. Next then, in place of that old one, we'll just change the isPresented to show file alert instead, and the presenting object to a view model app error. Let's test once more. This time we get that alert with the instructions that we provided. If I test the camera button, I see that the alert is appropriately presenting that camera error one too. So we're good. Now let's just make sure that we go back to our JSON file now and correct that key. Okay, well, what if one of the images got corrupted or is missing? Well, we can simulate the missing by simply changing the name temporarily of one of our images. This time if we run, we don't get an error. Instead, we get that placeholder image that we checked for in our myImage struct. That's great. Everything seems to be working fine. So let's change that image name back to the correct one. If we test again, We'll see that everything is loading as we would expect. So what we want to do next is to view the image when we tap on it. And this means that we'll be setting the selected image to that specific image. So we'll need a function for that first. In the view model, create a new function called display that has a single parameter of a myImage. In the body, we want to set the image to that particular image. We'll also set the image name property to the myImage's name. And also select the selected image to the one that was just selected as well. Then, back in Content View, we can add a tap gesture to each of the items in our for each loop that we'll call this function. And it'll pass in the particular image. Let's test. Notice now when I tap on an image, the image is displayed and the name as well. Also notice that the delete button now shows, and the name of our save button has changed to update. Well, we haven't coded any of those actions yet, so that's what we need to do. Well, the first thing we're going to do is to create one that will allow us to update our image name. So in the view model, create a new function called updateSelected. In the body, we can find the index of our array where the index of the selected image ID matches one of the ones in our myImages array. So we'll use an if-let on this and execute the first index method of myImages where $0 is equal to selected image ID. And we can safely unwrap it here because the update will only be available if the selected image has been set. Then we can change the name of the myImages at the index to the image name that is in that bound property. And then we can save the myImages.json file again and reset everything. The next function will be the deleteSelected. So we'll need to find the index again, exactly the same way as before. But this time we'll remove from myImages at that index. And then again, save and reset. If I return to the content view now, we can update our actions in our two buttons. So for the update action, if the selected image is not nil, we must be updating, so we can use an else and run our view model's updateSelected function. And then in the delete action, we can run our view model's deleteSelected function. So let's test. When we run this, we can select an item and update the image name. Great. Let's tap another image that we want to delete. But where's the delete button now? Now remember, we set the delete button so that it's only displayed if we are not editing. So if I tap return on my keyboard, this will lose the focus and the delete button appears again so that we can delete. Well, that's working well, but that's a bit confusing to our user. So what we want to do next is to add a focus state to that label and lose the focus each time I update a selected item so that when I tap on the next one, it will not be selected. And in iOS 15, a new property wrapper called focus state was introduced. So in content view, we can create a new property called name field that will specify as a Boolean value, but decorated with the @FocusState property wrapper. And then where we define our text field, we can set the .focused to this bound property when it equals true. This then will also allow us to set it back to false when we update our image name. I want to do one more thing with focus state though, and that's to add a button to our toolbar so that it will also allow us to unfocus the field without actually tapping the enter button. In iOS 15, it gives us the ability to add a toolbar button with a placement modifier that we can specify as the keyboard. And for this, we'll use a toolbar item group. So below the navigation title, let's add that. We'll start with a toolbar and then add a toolbar item group with a placement that is keyboard. Inside that group, create an H stack that has a spacer so that it'll push our button to the right of the keyboard. Then we'll create a button where there's an action that will simply set the name field to false. And for the label, we'll use an image with the system name of keyboard.chevron.compact.down. Let's test now. When we enter our text field, let's make sure that we display the keyboard in the simulator. Now we see that the button is on the keyboard and tapping it dismisses the keyboard and the text field loses focus. However, there's one glaring UI issue here. When I show the keyboard, that image is so small that it's not recognizable. And if we ever turned our phone to landscape mode, it would look really strange. So what we should probably do whenever we are editing is hide that scrolling list of images. That way we are focused on the image and there's enough room to display it. And this is easy to do since we know when we are editing and we've set that view models is editing property. So all we have to do is surround our scroll view with a check whether or not the view model is editing or not. So if not, view model is editing, we can then present the scroll view. Testing once more, we see that it works as expected. However, I have one more issue. If there is no image, I can tap in the name field and see that I can update, and that makes no sense at all. So we have to only display the name field and in fact the edit and delete buttons only if the view model has a selected image. So again, returning back to content view, we'll have to surround that text field and its buttons with that conditional, if not, selected image is equal to nil. You always have to check. Let's test one more time. Yes, this is exactly what I want. And when I select or choose a new image, either from the album or from my device, from a camera photo, I can zoom and pan on that image. That's perfect. Seems like our app is complete. But I want to do one more thing. The content view is really large and I want to break it up into smaller chunks so that it is more readable. Now, I could choose to create separate views, but that's also going to require that I provide an environment variable and a binding to any property that it has to change. Instead, I'm going to create computed properties that return some view. Let me show you. I'm going to start with our scroll view and cut it out. Next, I'm going to create an extension for our content view and create a new computed property that I'll call image scroll that will return some view. I can then paste the code in there. And I can now return to where I cut it out and just use that variable name, image scroll. We can do the same thing for our selected image. Let me cut this part out here where I determine the selected image, and I can do the same by creating a computed variable of that name that returns some view. And paste the code in. I can then use that variable in my content view. This creates an error, however, because my view can't return an opaque return type. And these are different types of views, so I need to somehow fix this so it's returning a single type. And I can do that by grouping the views in a group and return the group. Next is this name field and these edit buttons. So I'm going to create a new computed property in the extension that I'll call edit group that returns some view. But it also has two different types of views, so I'll first create a group, then I'll paste it in and return that group, and then use that variable in the vStack. And finally, for our picker button, I'll cut out the entire HStack, and since that's a single view, I don't need to create a group. I'll just create a new computed property that returns some view, and that will be what I just cut out, that HStack. And then finally, we can use picker buttons in my code. The rest of my content view should probably stay here, but because we have an extension, I can cut out that extension entirely from our content view and move it to its own file. So let's cut it out of here, and I'll create a new file called content view plus extension and paste the code into there. I'll also need to change the import to SwiftUI. Let's test. Let's try to add a new image from the photo album. I can select it just fine, but when it gets set to the image view, my name field and edit buttons are no longer visible. I've introduced a new bug. Well, this could be fixed by returning to content view, and I made a mistake here when I'm showing the edit group if the selected image is not nil. It shouldn't be selected image, it should be image. Let's test again. Let's select the image and give it a name like slow motion. And let's save. Another bug. This time my scroll view is no longer being displayed. This could be fixed then by returning to our view model, and when saving, we'll have to call the reset function. But we'll also need to tell the reset function to set the isEditing to false, and also set the selected image property back to nil. Let's try one more time. Yes, this works. Phew. You really do have to do some thorough testing. I do see one more thing that I do want to change though. And when I'm editing the name, I don't need to see my picker buttons at all. So I'm going to surround that picker buttons with another conditional. If not isEditing, then we can show our picker buttons. You see how much easier it is to add this logic in when our views are separated out into an extension or into separate views? Now, we haven't tried this on our device for a long time, so we better check there too. Now, I've compiled it on my iPhone, so let me run it and display that here. I only have one image in the Documents folder on my iPhone, and I can select that. What we need to do is to test the camera. I can still take a picture, and I can give it a name and save it. Well, that's it. Finally, we have an app that for all appearances looks like I have handled all possible errors, and it will present a good user experience. If you find any other bugs and determine a fix, please leave a comment in the comment section below so that others will see it. It's quite likely that I still may have missed something and not tested thoroughly enough. I hope you've enjoyed this extended series, and if you have, make sure that you give the video a thumbs up and leave a comment and subscribe to my channel. If you're interested in supporting my work, you can buy me a coffee. Thanks again for watching.